Yeah, this is it. Gather. Yeah, this is it. Yeah, this is it. Let's go. Back off. This is it. It's it. There. Gather. This is it. Yeah. This is it. Right. It's over. Yeah, let's go.
I hope that fight looks cool enough for the amount of hours I put into it. In my opinion, this fight against Roxas is a great showcase for what the player is capable of in KH2. It was extremely difficult to pull off because it's filled with precise inputs and required me to have as much knowledge as possible on Roxas. It also happens to be my favorite fight in any KH game, not only because Roxas is one of my favorite characters, but also because I think it's the most well done humanoid boss fight. I added the text to hopefully give everyone a deeper understanding of what goes into a fight like this. Because like I said, I spent many hours on it, and I had to plan out when to use the ether and like when to use my MP, my drive, just plan out everything in the fight ahead of time. And even then, just executing all the inputs correctly was really difficult. But I want to use this video to hopefully express why I love Kingdom Hearts 2's combat so much, and what I think makes it stand out compared to all the other KH games. So for the sake of keeping this video shorter, and not needing to replay every single KH game, I'm going to be comparing KH2's combat to KH1 and KH3. I think this is fair because the main trilogy all share the same base for combat, while the handhelds have different gimmicks to them. First off, we're going to compare the combat differences for KH1 and KH2. I think the main advantage KH2 has over KH1 is the amount of combat options that it added. While the HD remaster of KH1 did add some things to the game, such as beginner mode and a way to beat the game at level 1, the combat is still fairly simple compared to Kingdom Hearts 2. Your main tools for combat in KH1 are physical combos, magic, and summons. The game does have limits for Sora too, but that's pretty much it. KH2 brought back all these mechanics, but added in growth abilities, drive forms, and party member limits. I think Keyblades is a good example of where 2FM adds more options to combat compared to KH1. The only reason to choose between Keyblades and Kingdom Hearts 1 is for the strength or magic stat, the range of the Keyblade, or the likelihood of the Keyblade getting a critical hit, as some Keyblades have a modifier to the amount of crits that you get. But I think it's fair to say that there are very few situations where you want a Keyblade that has more crits rather than the higher strength stat, so it mainly comes down to the magic or strength stat. Because of this, Keyblades become obsolete as you get new ones, and while this makes sense because you should be getting stronger as you progress through the game, it lacks the layer of depth that KH2 had, where every Keyblade was useful in different situations because of the different abilities that it came with. In Kingdom Hearts 2, Keyblades are hardly ever obsolete, and there are plenty of examples where you can use an older Keyblade for a specific fight to accomplish something that you couldn't otherwise, such as using an extra finisher with Rumbling Rose, or using Mysterious Abyss against a boss weak to ice. The last thing I'll mention is there isn't too much for crowd control in KH1, and I feel like this makes some fights unfair, such as the Heartless mob before Final Rest, and the Heartless during the Ansem fights. Fighting all those Invisibles and Angel Stars and Dark Balls at the same time, without having any way to stun them or gather them all up, makes the fight a little unfair on crowd or level 1. You don't have any way to make an opening for yourself like you do in KH2, So you just have to attack them and pray that you don't get hit mid-combo from a random enemy that's on the other side of the room. Stop and gravity are useful for this, but they're nowhere near as useful as Chicken Little and Magnet, and you can also use Reflect if enemies are attacking you from all directions. So with all of that being said, overall I think KH1 had amazing gameplay for its time, and it's still a good combat system to this day. But in my opinion, KH2 improved upon everything that KH1 had. Now moving on to KH3. First off, I'll acknowledge that KH3 is getting the Remind DLC, and that may change parts of the gameplay. So it's not completely fair to compare 2FM to the base version of KH3. But it's all that we have at the moment, and we're not entirely sure if they're going to do anything to the combat when Remind releases. So first of all, I think one of the biggest issues I have with Kingdom Hearts 3 is how the situation commands work. Almost every situation command, aside from form changes, are just raw damage. And as far as attraction flows go, you do have to control them, meaning there is some skill involved in using them. However, the fact that it basically gives you a lot of free damage without requiring the player to do anything in order to earn that damage is pretty lame to me. It's almost always 100% luck when an attraction flow appears, and they also appear in super awkward moments. It's possible to turn off attraction flows, however that doesn't change what I don't like about them. It's basically free damage based on luck, and turning them off doesn't change how broken they are. Another situation command I don't like is Grand Magic. Now I admit Grand Magic is very pleasing to use and the player is rewarded with it after using magic in combat. However, it has the same issue as attraction flows, where it's free damage based on luck. You can manipulate the odds based on how much magic you use, so it's better in that regard, but I still think it would be better if it was just consistent. You can't rely on using Grand Magic in combat because sometimes it just won't appear, meaning when it does, it's partially luck-based damage rather than being entirely something the player strategically planned out. And moving on to limits that party members have in this game, they also suffer from the same issue that attraction flows have. They're luck-based, and some of them don't even require the player to do anything. I would say this is better balanced if attraction flows used up some sort of resource like MP or focus, and the same with limits, but they don't have any consequence. Now I understand if some players like these additions to the combat, because having an entirely skill-based balanced combat system isn't necessarily what everyone wants when playing Kingdom Hearts. Some people may enjoy the flashy animations and seeing all the enemies get completely destroyed, regardless if the player had to work for it or not, and I have nothing against that opinion. I just think it's a downgrade from the more strategic playstyle that was available in KH2. There's still a lot more that we could go over in KH3, like how Ralph can be used to destroy most humanoid bosses, even on crit level 1. Granted, the player knows how to use Ralph very well. Or how fire can be used to safely defeat bosses, especially with the right items and abilities equipped. The situation commands are enough to make me prefer KH2's combat though. Now there are of course many flaws in KH2, just as KH1 and KH3. For example, using Fenrir combined with negative combo, it's possible to beat Terra effortlessly, as well as being able to stunlock bosses with Peter Pan. The reason these don't bug me as much is because Peter Pan stunlock is only possible on a select few bosses, and abusing negative combo requires you to be a high enough level to have the ability and have obtained Fenrir. Duck Flare can be broken in the PS4 version of KH2. It's hands down the best limit in the game and deals ridiculous damage while Sora is invincible throughout the whole thing. However, it's not very good against regular Heartless or Nobodies, and it requires the player to go into an MP charge, meaning you need a way to refill MP constantly to be able to spam it. I think Duck Flare is still the most unbalanced attack in KH2, but it's not bad enough for me to say KH2 has unbalanced combat. I think KH2 has the most balanced combat in the series. So all of that is pretty much why I think KH2 has the best combat system, the most well-made and balanced one. Now I completely expect remarks or comments about how I'm a KH2 elitist, or I'm only expressing this because I'm a speedrunner and I only look at the games through a speedrunning lens. But I don't really understand why there's been so much outrage from people with differing opinions. I'm not saying people aren't allowed to enjoy any other KH game's combat, and I'm not going to say you're wrong for thinking KH2 isn't fun. I think that's the main issue I see with all the drama since KH3's release. People are arguing over which is the best game and say someone with a different opinion is either blind or just wrong. It's completely possible to have a civil discourse over the pros and cons of each KH game. There's no need to insult or dislike someone over having a different opinion. Alright, that's gonna be it from me. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you wanna support me, consider subbing to my YouTube or following me on Twitch. I'm super close to 1,000 subs on YouTube, so I'd really appreciate that if we got up there. But with that being said, I hope you all have a good day.